Terrified patients, medics in shock. The aftermath of an Iranian missile strike that hit a major hospital in southern Israel. This was the moment it struck this morning, penetrating air defences after one of Israel's quietest nights of the war so far. Around 40 people were injured, no one killed. As we arrive, patients are still being evacuated, including Moses from Argentina, who was being treated for an infection in his leg.
Inside the safe room, there was fear and hopelessness, a lot of fear. People were hysterical. What can you do? We're all safe now.
One sister took my hand and we entire in the safe room, and over the sudden there was a big boom and all the glasses, all the windows, all the walls, everything was broken. And in 1 second.
Emergency teams worked to douse the final flames. This strike could have been far worse.
Well, the missile is said to have slammed into the top floor of this building just here. Fortunately, it had been evacuated just a few days earlier, though there's still a significant number of staff and patients at the hospital, and dozens are said to have been lightly injured. All this really a reminder that for all its strength, Israel is at times still vulnerable to these strikes.
Iran claims it was targeting a nearby military facility, though the closest one is believed to be around 2 kilometers away.
This is clearly a war crime, an act of terrorism aimed towards a medical facility.
It's of course terrible that a hospital was hit. Internationally, I'm sure you can imagine a lot of people are also going to be saying that, well, Israel has hit a lot of hospitals in Gaza, and those must be war crimes too.
You need to remember that hospitals in Gaza were being used as terror headquarters. It's absolutely not the same.
Parts of Tel Aviv and central Israel were also hit this morning, causing damage and injuring dozens. The Israeli army said they believed Iran had used a cluster munition. The strikes here likely to bolster Israeli attempts to persuade President Trump to join the war against Iran.
He gave them the chance to do it through negotiations. They strung him along. You don't string along Donald Trump. He knows the game.
Israel's own strikes on Iran are already dealing the regime devastating blows. The military today releasing footage of aircraft bombing the inactive Arak nuclear reactor. Everyone in this region is braced for further violence. But here in Israel, there's still broad public backing for a war they believe is existential. Attacks like this only strengthen their support.
And Sikandar joins me now on the balcony. Sikandar, good to see you again. Trump saying it could take 2 weeks before he makes a decision. What's that all about?
Well, Matt, up until now, the reports had been growing in their suggestion that President Trump was veering towards ordering a strike on this, deep underground Fordo uranium enrichment facility we've been talking so much about, that only American bunker buster bombs can take out, that the Israelis want Trump to do. And we know that it's a divisive issue for his base, the idea of getting embroiled in another foreign war, the regime change issue. But at the same time, we've seen a lot of his political allies pointing out how consistently over many years President Trump has been talking about how Iran cannot be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. But look, certainly now it seems as if Trump is backing away from ordering a strike. We know that tomorrow Britain, France, Germany are going to be holding these discussions in Geneva with the Iranian foreign minister. So perhaps there is time for a diplomatic solution within that time frame. But we also know that up until recently, Iranian officials had been telling Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, that we'll only be holding real substantive negotiations once Israel's attacks end. So, a lot of unpredictability still in this situation.
Perhaps Trump thinks he can still get a Nobel Peace Prize. You don't need to answer that, by the way. We'll have to ask him, hopefully, one day.
I think you have.
OK. Well, earlier I spoke to Amos Yadlin, a former general in the Israeli Air Force, who was also military attaché to Washington and a former head of military intelligence in Israel. I asked him what difference he thought it would make to Israel if the US got involved in this war.
I think the importance of the American participation has to do on the technical issue of destroying most of the Iranian nuclear facilities. There is like 20 sites. Israel can reach 19 of them. There is one important place called Fordo, which is very much fortified against the most formidable bombs that Israel possesses, and it cannot be penetrated by Israel, and the only air force that can destroy it is the American Air Force. So this is about the engineering part of the house. But the political part is even more important, because if you destroy even 90% of the Iranian capabilities, the 10%, if you don't do any agreement and you let the Iranians develop what they want to develop, they will have the nuclear bomb. Not in 6 months, not in 1 year, but in 2 or 3 years. So what is important is to reach a different agreement on Iran nuclear ambitions.
A political agreement.
Political agreement.
But can that be done if you push them into a corner?
No, on the contrary. When you push them enough to the corner, there will be negotiation, and Mr. Witkoff will come like Popeye, and they will come with a very weak cards.
Was it helpful for Prime Minister Netanyahu to say, as he did the other day, that regime change could be one of the results of this? He wasn't saying that Israel was pursuing it, but he said it would be a welcome result.
I think it was very smart not to put the regime change in the list of the objective of the campaign.
Which he didn't do.
Which he didn't do.
Not publicly anyway, yeah.
And I think we are not good in having instrument to induce a regime change.
Right.
The lessons from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from anywhere, Libya is a bad lesson. Yeah. So it is smart not to put it on the list. We are also not good in predicting when it will happen.
But you could get chaos as a result.
Iran is a state. It is 3,000 years old empire that know what they want. And if it will come back to another regime, it's maybe taking some time, but they will be busy in their own, and they will not endanger Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Yemen, and the Western world. So nothing is worse than this regime.
Can Israel finish this war on its own terms without Trump's help?
This is not easy. It's not easy to destroy. As I say, Fordo is...
so Fordo stays, basically?
Fordo may stay. Never underestimate the Israeli innovation. Even successful wars always look like a big victory in the beginning, and then it may change. So Israel must find the time that it achieves most of its goal and look for a mechanism to end the war.
Final question. Much of the world sees this as a really big moment of peril, for your two countries, but also for the region, perhaps beyond. Is that the way you see it, or do you see it as a moment of opportunity?
So I think it's a moment of opportunity. If Iran will change, if the regime will fail, and even if the same regime will not have these formidable instruments of nuclear program in the threshold, and thousands of ballistic missiles and terror organization all over the Middle East, it's a wonderful opportunity to shape the Middle East towards peace.
Amos Yadlin speaking to me earlier today in his farm outside Tel Aviv. Now, it remains very difficult to find out what exactly is happening inside Iran, where a communications blackout is still in force. But many Iranians are in a state of fear, living with the consequences of the ongoing Israeli offensive at the same time as a renewed crackdown on dissent by their own government. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, has this report.
Smoke rose from the heavy water reactor at Arak after Israel's overnight attack. Despite President Trump's equivocation, one man whose identity we've disguised for his own safety told us that Iranians are terrified of what might happen next.
They've attacked the nuclear site. Trump said it was effective, but not enough. Now, not enough probably means that America's giant bomber planes, bunker busters, are going to come and attack us. I'm really stressed.
Israel is also targeting organs of the state, like the police headquarters, hit yesterday. That hasn't stopped the authorities from arresting hundreds of people, including those who take pictures or post statements deemed to be against the Islamic Republic. One of Iran's most famous rappers, Tumaj Saleh, is amongst those reported to have been detained. He was released just 6 months ago after being imprisoned for taking part in anti-government protests. The Iranian state's automatic response is always to silence dissent. Those who can leave Tehran have done so.
Only 3 families remained from the 10 in our building. Those who had children have left. There is no one around me. At night, we can't sleep well. We are under a lot of psychological pressure. We wake up every minute. Tehran has become very empty, even emptier than during COVID. Those who have to go to work still go, but the shops are very quiet. I only go out to buy essentials and then return home.
In Moscow, the Russian leader spoke to journalists last night and was on the phone to his Chinese counterpart today. But neither of Iran's closest allies seems to be leaping to the defense of the Islamic Republic.
It seems to me that it would be right for everyone to look for ways to end hostilities, so all parties to this conflict can come to an agreement. This would be to ensure both Iran's interests for its nuclear activities, including peaceful nuclear activities, peaceful nuclear energy, and also the interests of Israel from the point of view of the unconditional security of the Jewish state.
Nor are Iran's axis of resistance regional allies coming to its defense. Today, Iraq organized a shipment of medical aid, but Iraq's pro-Iranian militia have not entered the conflict, and nor have the Houthis or what remains of Hezbollah. State TV is still off air after an Israeli strike on Monday, and tonight Tehran is reported to be under fire again. The Iranian news agency has released more pictures of missiles allegedly being fired towards Israel. The question now, can President Trump stop this war from escalating?
Lindsay Hilson reporting. Well, earlier I spoke to the Iranian author Saha Delijani. Her book, Children of the Jacaranda Tree, is based on her family's experience as political dissidents. It describes how her uncle was killed by the Islamic regime for his opposition and her own birth in prison. She now lives in the US and is a supporter of the Woman Life Freedom movement that emerged after the death of Mahsa Amini in 2022. I started by asking her if she'd heard from her family members in Iran.
Unfortunately, I haven't been able to contact them ever since 2 days ago. The internet is down. No one can contact anybody. We don't know how people are, and we don't know what's going on.
And do you and your relatives welcome at least some aspects of this military intervention, this war by Israel?
I strongly condemn it. Iranians don't want destruction. Iranians don't want bombs. Iranians don't want war. And we don't want it not just for Iran. We don't want it for the entire region. I think this has to stop for everybody.
And I know that your family aren't exactly friends of the Iranian regime. If this war led to the collapse of that regime, would the bloodshed, would the military activity, all the stuff that you have just described that you hate, would that have been worth it, do you think?
Of course not. Absolutely not. Because we have seen it. I mean, this is not a new example. This is not a new scenario. We've seen it happen in Iraq. We've seen it happen in Afghanistan. I mean, how many more examples do we need to understand that wars don't bring democracy, they don't bring freedom, they don't bring equality. Also because it's not only about toppling a regime, it's not only about toppling a dictatorship, it's about building democracy.
I understand what you're saying, and you're saying it loud and clear. But what do you want then for the people of Iran? Because you've been trying to bring about democracy for decades and it hasn't worked.
First of all, I think that's completely wrong, because I think that Iran has changed so much in the past 40 years. We all know that. It's of course, it's a slow fight. It's a painful fight, but But I think it's still like Iranians have changed through their courage and their persistence, and all those activists who have been fighting for years, who go on hunger strikes, who pay with their own lives for this democracy to take shape. So in Iran, we do have a dictatorship, and we want to change that. We want to bring democracy and equality and freedom and justice for our people, but we want to do it our own way. And I think everybody has to have that right. Nobody can decide for Iranians, and nobody can decide for any other people in the world. This just has to stop.
But what about the protests of a few years ago when we saw tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of Tehran and so many other cities against the regime? Very, powerful vocal protests. Can you have democracy with this regime still in charge?
No, but we will change. But we will change that regime. Iranians will decide for themselves how they want to build that path toward democracy. We cannot decide for them.
So the Israeli government and Israelis who really don't like this government at all, as well as many Iranian exiles, and quite a few governments in Europe and elsewhere, they see the government, the regime in Tehran, as one of the prime causes for instability in the entire region. And although, even if they don't welcome this war, they would see the removal of that regime as a massive opportunity for rebuilding and peace. You don't see it that way at all.
It's Israel that has been attacking not only Palestine, but Lebanon, Syria, Yemen. I mean, how many more of these attacks? How many more places need to be bombed, first of all? And second of all, there has been a diplomatic path, hasn't there? There were talks, weren't there? So, I mean, like, they come and just lie in everyone's faces. And it's as if, like, nobody can say anything to that.
Sahar Delejani, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, we'll be back a little bit later in the programme from Tel Aviv, but let's go to Kathy in London. Kathy.
Thanks, Matt. Well, Sir Keir Starmer has urged Donald Trump to step back from any military action against Iran. But what influence can the UK bring to bear on the situation in the Middle East? The Prime Minister is reported to have received advice from the Attorney General that any UK involvement beyond defending our allies could prove legally problematic.
The Attorney's advice is never disclosed by any government. But I can tell you the principle, the driving intent, which is that de-escalation, because the risk of escalation across the region is obvious, and the impact it would have. I'm talking to leaders across the region all of the time. They're voicing their concerns about what might happen in relation to them. Obviously, it's having an impact on the economy, and Gaza is already in an intolerable situation.
Well, earlier I caught up with the former head of MI6, Sir John Soares, at an event held by London's Chatham House think tank. He's played a key role in devising government policy on Iran and Iraq over the years. I asked him if the intelligence underpinned the strikes against Iran.
I think the situation is pretty clear. The Iranians have developed a nuclear program with large quantities of highly enriched uranium, which can only have one possible purpose, which is to put it in a nuclear weapon. And what we don't know is how far they got on the weaponization front. I'm not saying the evidence from intelligence changed the picture. I think there are other factors that dictated the timing of this, more to do with events since 7 October 2023. But I think we have to recognize that the Iranians were developing a nuclear program that had only one purpose in due course, which was to produce a nuclear weapon.
Because, of course, parallels have been drawn with the dodgy dossier in the run-up to the Iraq war, except this time there isn't even a dossier, I mean, let alone whether it's dodgy or not.
Well, that's because this isn't based on intelligence. It's based on very clear information, which has been out there for years.
If the US does strike Iran, first of all, is that a when, not if, in your view?
I think the Americans are preparing to do that. It would be an odd thing for the Israelis to attack various aspects of Iran's nuclear program, but to leave the biggest, most deeply buried, most capable sites untouched. The Israelis have not targeted the Fordo underground plant yet because they know they can't do any damage to it. So I think there is a justification for the Americans to come in, and frankly I think the sooner they do it the better, because it gives a chance to draw a line under this conflict, destroy as much of the nuclear program as you can, and then start from a new beginning.
I mean, the sooner it's done, the better. But, you know, the Iranians are threatening irreparable harm in return. We're kind of unleashing untold consequences, aren't we?
The biggest problem would be if the regime survives and the nuclear program is still largely intact. And there is, of course, also a risk, Kathy, of an asymmetric response by the Iranians. We know that the Iranians have sent their operatives to this country to attack and kill Iranian oppositionists who are based here and running radio programs and so on. The same capability can be used for terrorist actions against other people.
And then there's the possibility of blowback, especially if the UK is involved.
There is that possibility. I don't see the need for the UK to get directly involved in this militarily. Obviously, if Diego Garcia is used as a base for the US bombers, then there'll be a process to go through to get clearance for that.
Aside from Diego Garcia, which does involve the UK is then involved in this action, right?
Yeah.
But you think the UK should quite consciously stay out of it?
Well, I don't think there's any need for us to be part of it, but I think the only role the UK could possibly sensibly play would be a defensive one.
Is regime change the objective of this Israeli offensive?
I don't think the Israelis have quite settled on this yet. If the Islamic leadership loses all authority, I think you'll end up with a military regime in Iran, and you also carry the risk of a sort of ethnic fragmentation with Kurds and Arabs and Baluch and even the Azeris falling back into some form of ethnic nationalism and splintering of the country. I don't think that would be good either. But I'm not sure the Israelis care a great deal about the outcome in Iran. They're just focused on the on dismantling and destroying the nuclear program.
But the rest of the world cares. Just spell out a bit more what the consequences of regime change might be from your experience in the region.
I think it's regime collapse that we're looking at. As an outside possibility. I don't think it's likely that when a regime does collapse, it's the side or the faction that fights most brutally and lethally that gains the upper hand.
You said if the US is going to get involved, they should do it and do it quickly. Do you think in some ways, as some have argued, that Benjamin Netanyahu has sort of done something that people should have done years ago? They've stood up to Iran, they're tackling Iran.
I think the best outcome all along would have been a negotiated one. But now the Israelis have moved us into this position, whether we like it or not. There's no point being stuck halfway across this project to dismantle the nuclear program. It'd be better for the Americans to do what they can do to destroy as much of it as possible.
Sir John Sawers, thanks very much.
Thanks, Kathy.
Well, President Trump has said he'll make his decision as to whether to join Israel in attacking Iran within the next 2 weeks. The White House claims that there is a substantial chance of negotiations to ensure peace, hence Trump's delay. But could he be dithering because his party is divided? For many of Trump's most ardent cheerleaders, the prospect of America getting involved in another foreign war is a betrayal of one of Mr. Trump's central election promises. Kieran Moodley reports.
Whose team is Donald Trump on? Flanked by the players of Juventus to mark the Club World Cup, the president used the occasion to once again delay what to do about Iran.
Does that mean you haven't made a decision yet on what to do?
I have ideas as to what to do, but I haven't made a final. I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due, because things change.
Reports suggest Trump has approved plans to attack Iran, believing it's needed to stop Tehran developing nuclear weapons. But Trump is yet to pull the trigger, and his press secretary today said that decision could take up to 14 days.
Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks.
Trump's dithering could be because, away from the White House, so many of his supporters are telling him not to go to war.
The neocons that have been wrong about every major foreign policy decision of the last 20 years. They were wrong about Afghanistan, they were wrong about Iraq, they were wrong about Libya.
Influential podcasters like Charlie Kirk are hoping that Donald Trump sticks to his key foreign policy agenda, that America comes first and that there are no more wars or interventions, just as Trump said on the campaign trail nearly a decade ago.
We're getting out of the nation-building business and instead focusing on creating stability in the world.
In his first term, Trump agreed to withdraw forces from Syria and Afghanistan. And during last year's campaign, he promised to end the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East.
I want everybody to stop dying. They're dying.
And that's the message the MAGA movement wants him to stick to.
My interest is really simple. I don't want the United States enmeshed in another Middle Eastern war that doesn't serve our interests.
Two bastions of MAGA, former Fox News host Tucker Carlson and former Trump advisor Steve Bannon, have been leading the charge against regime change in Tehran.
How many people live in Iran, by the way? I don't know the population. At all? No, I don't know the population.
And Carlson is taking his message to Republican hawks like Senator Ted Cruz.
Why is it relevant whether it's 90 million or 80 million or 100 million? Why is that relevant? Because if you don't know anything about the country... I didn't say I don't know anything about Okay, what's the ethnic mix of Iran? They are Persians and What percent? predominantly Shia. Okay, it's not even... You don't know anything about Iran. So okay, I am not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran. You're a senator who's calling for the overthrow of the government. You're the one who claims anything about the country.
Cruz may not have done himself any favors, but he's not alone, with Fox News hosts saying that if Trump attacks Iran, he will still be a president of peace.
That is a man who's going to make sure this generation and future generations are protected from nuclear missiles coming out of the Middle East, from barbarian primitives from the 7th century.
So which podcaster or politician will the president listen to? Trump himself called Tucker Carlson kooky, as he admitted that his party is divided.
So I may have some people that are a little bit unhappy now, but I have some people that are very happy, and I have people outside of the base that can't believe that this is happening. They're so happy.
This is a decision that may define Trump's second term. But remember, in his first term, the president was surrounded by more experienced figures like H.R. McMaster, Jim Mattis, Mike Pence, who often restrained the president and argued that they kept the world safe. Now the situation is more fragile, those men are gone, and Trump is surrounded largely by loyalists. The future of the Middle East and his movement depends on Trump's next move.
Kieran Moodley there. Well, earlier I sat down with Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, formerly the commander of US troops in Europe, and I asked him, what should Donald Trump do next?
The biggest mistake that he could make would be to fail to clearly identify what's the outcome. Other than destroying the Iranian nuclear program, then what? What happens next? And that was our problem in Iraq. We did not have a clearly defined objective, and so you end up making bad policy because there's no strategy to connect the policies to.
So what are the consequences of that if he doesn't identify? What happens after?
The Iranians would probably launch retaliatory strikes against potentially U.S. forces that are deployed around the Middle East. They could do things that would significantly disrupt the flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf, which would have implications around the world.
People around Trump seem to be sort of playing down Iran's capability.
Honestly, I don't have any confidence in the people around the president. The Secretary of Defense is not competent for the job. The Director of National Intelligence was not even invited to the last big meeting they had. I just don't have the confidence that you've got people that are thinking strategically, that are working with all the relevant actors in the region, the Saudis, for example, and the Qataris, as well as Israel, as well as our European allies.
Isn't that a rather terrifying prospect?
Yeah, of course it is.
You think the UK should stand up to the US as a sort of critical friend on this?
I think I hope that Prime Minister is communicating to President Trump, what do you want to accomplish? What is the desired outcome? You know, the UK has been with the US on so many things where unfortunately the Americans did not clearly identify the strategic outcome, and I hope the Prime Minister does do that.
If the UK gets involved, there are question marks over the legality of such an action, as there were over Iraq. Are you hearing the echoes very strongly, given your role in Iraq?
Certainly, I do hear people talk about, wait a minute, you know, we talk about the international rules-based order, which was the reason for supporting Ukraine against Russia, but now we're contemplating an attack on a sovereign country, Iran. And no matter how detestable that regime is, you would still have to address the fact that we'd be attacking a sovereign country.
I mean, there are some around him who say that the unpredictability of the Trump administration is It's a strategic genius because it keeps everybody on their toes. There are others who go, well, hang on a sec, we're on the brink of potentially World War III and we have no idea what one man is going to do. Where do you stand?
This is the first time in my life, 67 years, that I didn't have confidence that I could predict what a president was likely to do, because he doesn't follow any of the normal sort of procedures. He seems very dismissive of what allies think and those sort of things, and it's hard to know what really is driving all of this. And then by his own words, he says, you know, I'll know about 1 second before I decide what we're going to do. Now, that might be, that sounds cool if you're talking about negotiating for a condominium in downtown Manhattan, but we're talking about, exactly as you said, a situation that could lead to catastrophic outcome in the Middle East. And I think it really will be driven, does he feel like this is absolutely going to work and he wants to be in on the kill and take credit for it? If he's not certain that it will work, I think he will be very reluctant to do it.
Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, thank you very much.
Thank you for the privilege.